So I have an example to share today it's a transit market analysis that we used StreetLight Data to support. So this was a project that we did we're still in progress for the Rapid, which is the transit agency serving the Grand Rapids area. So we wanted to conduct a market analysis to understand the demand for public transit in the community and to understand if there were areas where there might be unmet demand or if there are other aspects of the transit service that could be improved with a better understanding of the overall travel in the Grand Rapids area. I should also mention, we were also working with the company Nelson Nygaard on this study, and we're moving towards a preferred alternative that would update the transit operations in the Grand Rapids area. And some of the specific things that we wanted to find out by using the StreetLight data, we wanted to understand the underlying travel demand, including in areas that the Rapid maybe doesn't serve. We wanted to also understand the demographics of the travel patterns, with an understanding that certain populations are more interested in using public transit than others. And we also evaluated a number of potential corridors that were under consideration to understand if there was indeed a market for a new transit route along that corridor, or how people were using that corridor. So for the project, we developed a set of 50 custom zones to query origin destination information as was described in the previous presentation. So we set up these zones based on a number of factors. We wanted to have relatively uniform zones, but there were also certain areas that the Rapid staff had heard requests for service that they were especially interested in trying to understand better to see if there really was a market for transit. So you can see a couple zones. For example, in the Northeast, there was a corridor of interest. On the Southwest, there was a corridor of interest. We really set up these zones specifically to understand the area that the Rapid was interested in. So the map is showing the color-coded travel patterns by the trips per square mile. And you can see, this is fairly unsurprising, but the downtown area has the highest density of travel. And then there also are some outlying nodes that have a lot of activity, such as the Woodland Mall in the Southeast, and Rivertown Crossings on the Southwest. And of course, this is all pre-COVID data. This is 2016 to 2018. So this project started last year, and this is sort of the first phase of it before COVID hits. This shows the same information from pre-COVID times, but now we're showing it as a line, as a flow. So you can see a similar pattern, but also some other aspects stand out when you visualize it this way. Even though the downtown is the heaviest travel pattern, there's only one of the individual flows in and out that is in the highest category. And in fact, a lot of the heavier flows are in areas to the south and to the southeast. And there are a number of reasons for this. In part, the size of the zones can play a role. So if a zone is larger, it may appear to have a heavier flow, even though it's spread out over a larger area. So when I was preparing these slides, there was one suggestion from the StreetLight folks to give a little bit of information about how I created these maps, because these maps were created in ArcGIS using the data that's exported from StreetLight. So if you're interested in the technical details, I will give them a brief overview here. So essentially, the challenge to map the flows is to create the lines themselves. And so essentially what we need to do is create a shapefile that represents those lines. And it's essentially, you have a line between every individual origin and every individual destination. And so you want to, in a spreadsheet, you want to set up the coordinates of each of those points. And you want to create a new identifier for each combination of origins and destinations in that spreadsheet. And that can be anything that you choose yourself. Typically what I'll do is I'll just merge the IDs that are already existing for the two zones. And then you can simply take that spreadsheet and import it into ArcGIS, and you use the tool called XY2Line that can take the lat long coordinates of each point and draw the line between them. So Once you do that, it's simply a matter of connecting the data from StreetLight onto those lines that you've generated, and then you can map out the patterns you want to see. This next slide shows some of the demographic factors that we were interested in as we mapped out these travel flows. So in particular, we looked at the, we looked at the travel flows of individuals who don't have children at home. Those are shown in pink. We looked at the flows of lower income populations. Those are shown in yellow. And also the top flows for individuals of color, which are shown in blue. So I think each of these has a slightly distinctive pattern. We see especially a lot of, I guess, lower income and communities of color traveling north-south to the south of downtown, and some other patterns that are interesting and I guess largely what you might expect if you know the area's demographics. This shows another way that we like to slice and dice the travel flows. So this is looking at one particular zone that was of interest. This is the Broadmoor area that's near the airport. And we just drill down to the flows that are going to and from that zone. And we can see there's especially a lot of activity going immediately north and northeast of the zone, and also immediately to the west of the zone. So if we were planning service to serve that area, we'd take that kind of information into account. This slide gives an example where a corridor had been under consideration for potential service. This is the Leonard corridor, and it currently has two different bus routes, one on the west side of the river and one on the east side of the river. And we wanted to analyze, would it make sense to combine the routes? So we mapped out only the flows that are involving the zones immediately along that corridor. And we can see, there are some flows that are crossing the river that could potentially benefit from the new service, but also it doesn't seem to be the dominant pattern. And based on our evaluation, using this type of a map, we were able to reach the conclusion that, in fact, changing the service in this way would probably inconvenience more people who are headed downtown than it would help the people crossing the river. So this type of analysis was quite helpful to answer that question. Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of the 2019, or I guess the analysis that was completed before COVID. But then as we continued with the project, obviously a pandemic has hit and changed travel patterns quite dramatically. So we provided an update to our analysis in the wake of COVID-19 to try to understand how had travel patterns changed and how might that affect the Rapids planning. So this graph shows how travel patterns were affected in the immediate aftermath of the COVID coming to the United States and the different stay-at-home orders that were put in place. So you can see that this is the decline in weekday vehicle miles traveled in Kent County, which contains Grand Rapids. And at the peak of things, about 72% of travel had gone away compared to January. That was in late March, early May. And then after that point, things have started to return to normal in terms of traffic levels. Great. So the analysis that we did looked at the final 2 weeks of May 2020. This was an analysis that we had done over the summer this year. And we compared the before and after to understand which areas and which travel flows were most affected by COVID-19 in the Grand Rapids area. So obviously, when you look at the map on the right, obviously a lot of the flows have dropped dramatically, but you do see that some areas have been more resilient and had a greater amount of travel continue than others. So especially the corridor towards the south of the community, the sort of the south central area, has a good amount of travel that has maintained itself even in the wake of the pandemic. And also a number of other flows, such as some of them that are going to major shopping centers. And then this map shows that same comparison, but using color coding. So you can see the flows that are in and out of downtown Grand Rapids are mostly highlighted in red. Those have seen the most dramatic reduction. And then the flows that are in blue have seen a much smaller reduction as of May. we looked at the same type of information using a density map as well. And this is interesting, especially in comparison to the flows. So in this map, we can see that the downtown Grand Rapids area is still one of the largest destinations, even despite the reductions that have occurred. Downtown Grand Rapids is still the dominant destination in the region. And we can also see how the other areas' travel patterns have dropped off. This shows that same comparison color coded. So the red areas have dropped by over half as of May, and then the blue areas have seen a smaller reduction. So finally, we wanted to touch on the demographic aspects of this, because when we looked at the demographic crosstabs, there's some pretty clear patterns that we see. So the travel has fallen the most. Again, this is as of May, so I think the trends may have settled out somewhat, but as of May, the travel patterns had declined the most for higher income populations, more educated populations, white and Asian populations, people traveling at the peak morning peak hour, and people making shorter trips. That the shorter trips can be probably avoided more easily. On the other hand, some populations were not able to reduce their travel as much. So that included the lower income travelers, people with lower education levels, Black, Hispanic, and other race populations, travel that occurred during the midday on the weekends, and longer distance trips. And then finally, these graphs just reinforce that the same trends that we were noting. So this is the breakdown by income. You can see higher income populations reducing their travel at a higher rate. This is the same by education. We can see lower education folks were less able to reduce their travel. Higher education folks were more able. Here we go. Yeah, race and ethnicity. We can see that white and Asian populations reduced their travel more, and other populations less so. Travel by day and time. So we can see the peak travel, especially AM peak, saw the largest decline during COVID. Some of these other weekends and off-peak times saw a smaller decline. Great, and then this is the breakdown by distance. So we're seeing the shorter trips were more able to be curtailed, and then the longer trips tended to be more resilient to keep happening during COVID. So all of this really valuable information for the Rapid to understand what was happening to their service. Obviously, during COVID, transit ridership declined at an even greater rate than overall travel. And so this information helped them understand how their service area was impacted and help them plan for the recovery.